Hey there, this is Mr. Icarus, and welcome to a quick peek of Medieval. Before I get started, I should probably explain what a quick peek is, considering I haven't done one of these for a while. It's essentially a video where I give you my initial impressions of something that is very much work in progress, preview code, what have you, and in this case, I got a lovely bit of preview code from the generous people over at New Blood, the publisher that's also responsible for Dusk, something that I have greatly enjoyed lately. And this comes to us from developer Indefatigable. I hope I said that right. But the thing that piqued my interest is the fact that the developers of this were also responsible for a Doom mod that I quite enjoyed a little while back called Return of the Triad, which was essentially bringing Rise of the Triad into Doom. And I distinctly remember they did a pretty damn good job of it. So you could say that my expectations for this are slightly elevated as a result, but if you want to know where this particular game is coming from, it's aiming to be very much a throwback, similar in fashion to the intentions of Dusk, but as you can see, the execution here is very different. Where Dusk goes for the low-poly Quake stylings of yesteryear, this is taking advantage of the Unreal Engine 4, albeit with slightly retro stylings peppered about the place. As you've already probably figured out, the opening area I've been making my way through here is a selection hub, allowing you to go through a portal for difficulty, and then through another to select the world that you'd like to play through. And this version that I have access to offers a handful of levels, giving me a reasonable taste of what to expect when Medieval is slated to go into proper early access later this very month, I believe. Anyway, this opening level is the Selenic Stronghold. It'll give us our first taste of combat with the enemies of a Medieval, and it will also give us our first new weapon. Not to disparage the axe or anything, but it is primarily a melee weapon that needs you to get up close and personal to deal damage, but the sword here operates on mana, allowing me to send out an energy slash at a distance, or, if the enemy's too close, just hit him in the face with it. That works too. In terms of mana, there's different types to suit different kinds of weaponry. The sword in particular here runs on green mana, and I'm very shortly about to run out of it. You may notice I've been collecting blue mana, and that will be because technically the sword isn't really the first weapon that you collect in a Medieval. The only reason I had that is because I was doing some crafty secret hunting. No, the Staff of the Azure Orb is the first thing that you'll get your grubby mitts on. In terms of effectiveness, it fires at a much faster rate than the sword, and I'm pretty sure the projectiles have some kind of minor homing capacity as well. It's kind of hard to tell, but I'm pretty sure that as long as the enemy is alive, some of those projectiles are going to alter their course to slam accurately into their faces. As for the enemies we've encountered so far, we've seen two different types, one of which just makes a beeline for you, and is very much melee focused. The second type is what I like to call the samurai, which seems to wield the same kind of sword that I do, can send out energy slashes to hit you from a distance, and they tend to go down in one or two axe hits, which is always good information to know when you're running short on mana. Another thing that's very much worth taking note of is the fact that when enemies die, not only do they fall amusingly into bits, but they also leave behind soul. Now this goes into the bar below my health, and when you fill that, you get a pretty damn cool overcharge attack for your current weapon that pretty much melts faces. Anything in your immediate vicinity is pretty much buggered when you've got that active, and it will constantly deplete from whenever it's activated. When it's full, there's no option to save it. It's whenever you trigger your next attack that it will launch, and you can actually keep that overcharge going for longer if you continuously hoover up souls as you continue your rampage. As far as I can tell, the overcharge affects pretty much every available weapon that's in this version of a Medieval. The sword, if you missed it, has an enhanced attack that ricochets all over the shop and can also penetrate multiple enemies as well, so that's pretty good to bear in mind if you're in a situation with a lot of enemies bearing down on you. You may have also noticed that some of the enemies I recently dispatched are a little smarter than they first appeared. They're still kinda dumb. I mean, they just make a beeline for your face and try to poke you with a sword, but still, they will pursue. They will leap up from lower platforms to get at you, which is pretty interesting. and will constantly keep you on your toes. You can't just rely on falling back to higher ground to save you. You will have to engage these enemies sooner rather than later. As for the pacing of combat in a medieval, I'd certainly say that it feels more reserved than the hypermobility of something like Dusk. Not to imply that a medieval is slow, far from it. I mean, as you can tell from the action on screen here, there's plenty of opportunity to get embroiled in pretty hectic encounters, doubly so when they include multiple variants of enemy. You've got your close-range harassers, you've got your longer-range samurai types, you've got bomb chuckers, which can be especially damaging if you're not aware of them. And what I mean by that is occasionally there's some fiendish placement among the levels where they'll be on higher platforms just out of sight, but still more than able to rain death on you from above. And that big guy that I just took out, normally they're a bit more intimidating, but I do have Overcharge active right now, so sucks to be that guy. Those guys do drop large souls, which are pretty great if you want to keep an overcharge streak going, but if you have to deal with more than one of them at a time, they can get pretty intimidating, especially in more confined circumstances. When it comes down to it though, I feel like the overcharge mechanic here really makes for a pretty damn fun gameplay loop. Each bit of combat you engage in, every bit of soul you collect is all in aid of getting back up to that uber powerful state where you can just rip into, especially using a spinning battle axe, and just watch things explode into bloody piles of armor on the floor. It's something that never ceased to put a little bit of a smile on my face, and something that I'm very much looking forward to returning to when other levels are available to me. Speaking of levels, how do I feel about the ones that are currently available to me? Well, there's certainly something of a familiarity to them in terms of the construction, in terms of, hunting down keys, looking for switches to activate certain things. There's certainly very much a throwback vibe to them, but in terms of look, they're certainly visually distinctive. I can't quite put my finger on it, but there's something I really enjoy about the style. As for how the level complements the combat encounters, there's typically plenty of room to play with when it comes to multiples of enemies, but it's not afraid to go a little bit more claustrophobic when necessary, just to dial up the intensity. On the world building front, I'm a fan of this graffiti that you can find in various places throughout the levels, just giving you little snippets of text, filling in a bit of backstory to the world that you're currently rampaging through. It's all very well and good to have pretty environments. It's even better when they come with a little bit of backstory and lore. The only caveat I'd add to that, however, is very occasionally you can trigger the text when you're in the midst of combat, and that can be a little distracting, having text in the middle of the screen when you're trying to aim at something that's, trying to kill you. Returning to the subject of weaponry, there's two others that I discovered during the course of my gameplay with this version of a medieval, first of which being the Voltride, which is pretty much, it's a trident. It's a trident that shoots electric fuck you energy. That's what it is. It certainly got the fastest fire rate out of the available weapons in this version, and it caused me to think about something else that may or may not be a factor at all. I was wondering whether the kind of mana that a weapon uses would change its effectiveness against certain enemies. For example, I noticed that certain enemies were coded, be it blue or green, and I noticed that some of my mana was blue or green. And that caused me to think whether certain weapons would have enhanced effectiveness against different kinds of enemies, some kind of mana-based rock, paper, scissors, if you will. Like I said earlier though, it might not be a thing, but it certainly would be cool if it was. But when it comes to my hands-down favorite weapon that I've used in this version of a medieval so far, I think the award has to go to the Celestial Claw, because look at it! It shoots stars! It shoots stars that slam into the face of your enemies and cause a nova shockwave. How is that not the coolest goddamn thing? It's fantastic. And I know, I'm probably going a little all in too early considering this is just overkill mode. Just overkill mode, he says, while wielding a celestial claw that shoots frickin' stars, but even when it reverts back to standard mode, you're still flinging goddamn planets into your enemies' faces. And you know what makes this even more fun for me is the fact that some of the planets you'll be flinging do actually get fairly recognizable. At some point, you'll spot Jupiter, you might even spot Mars, and you might even spot Earth. And guess what? If you use it to blow up an enemy, I'm pretty sure you get an achievement for blowing up the earth. So yeah, Celestial Claw. Hands down my favorite so far. Rounding out this particular version of Medieval is actually a boss encounter pitting you against the Moon Guardian. Look, it's got a health bar and everything. God, I miss boss battles in FPS games. Feels like there's been a little bit of a resurgence of them between this and the likes of Dusk. There's just nothing quite like being pitted against some giant, overwhelming death machine and persevering through nothing but your own skill and damage-dealing ability. And this guy is certainly a big guy for you. But really, when it comes down to it, the tactics here are dodge for your goddamn life, because the Crescent Moon boomerangs that he flings all over the place will hit you every now and again, whether you like it or not, despite your best dodging ability. So really, it's all about health management, making sure you're very much aware of those health pickups and making periodic trips back there just to make sure you don't keel over. Same thing goes for the mana pickups as well. They're placed at various points, encouraging a lot of movement around the arena, and you'll also notice that there's some soul pickups as well, so you can indeed build towards your overkill state if you keep an eye on where those spawn. Another obvious thing to take into account during this as well is don't let the Moon Guardian get too close to you, because as annoying as the boomerangs are, I'm pretty sure you don't want to get a face full of the actual physical Crescent staff itself. Pretty sure that would comprehensively suck. But anyway, we are perilously close to the end of this boss battle. Just a few hits away from defeating it, and just a few soul collections away from being able to unleash the overkill mode. And let's face it, that is the coolest way to be able to dispatch a boss. And I'm pretty sure we're about to do it. There we go. Now we get to watch him fling apart. Yes, lovely. Much like the rest of the enemies when they die and apparently get crushed underneath a descending platform. Oh well. But yes, that brings to a close this preview version of Medieval. Have to say, I've had quite a fun time with what there is here, and I'm very much looking forward to sinking my teeth into the extra levels that are going to release alongside the early access version, not to mention the rest of the weaponry. Have to confess though, I have had a little bit of a sneak peek. There were some provisions here that allow you to check out the rest of the weaponry, but I feel displaying them in this video wouldn't do them much justice. I'd much rather be able to showcase them in the appropriate context, so I guess you're just gonna have to tune in when I check out the expanded early access version. But in the meantime, I hope this video was at the very least entertaining and certainly illuminating. I hope you learned a few new things about Medieval. I certainly learned a few things, and I learned that I had a pretty good time with it. But in any case, this has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.